It was a cool spring evening in Moscow on March 22, 2024. The Crocus City Hall was alive with its usual energy. It's a big shopping and entertainment complex in the quiet and peaceful suburb of Krasnogorsk in the northwestern part of Moscow. You were surrounded by strangers, but it felt safe. Families laughed, couples held hands, and street performers gathered for small crowds as they showcased their talents. The auditorium was almost full as people had come to see the popular band Picnic perform live. Food and music had drawn hundreds of people from all corners of the city and beyond. You had no idea that something horrible was about to happen and change absolutely everything about the happy evening. At about 7:55 local time, an unidentified vehicle pulled up at a pedestrian crossing near the Crocus Expo Exhibition Center. 4 masked men stepped out with fully automatic rifles and military-grade gear, and with no hesitation began sprinting into the building. They moved with terrifying efficiency, advancing 300 meters inside the building in seconds. By the time they reached the concert hall, the 4 men began to open fire on a crowd of people, sending shockwaves throughout the entire venue. People started running and screaming in pure panic for fear of their lives. Just a few minutes later, Russia's emergency helplines lit up with desperate calls for help, while the attackers went around for 18 minutes shooting and stabbing people at point-blank range, and setting fires to burn all the victims alive. Russia's emergency task force was dispatched and rushed to the scene, but they were too late to catch the attackers. All 4 men exited the building, ran back into the vehicle, and fled the scene. This was a reality for hundreds of civilians that night. An event that was supposed to bring joy and connection quickly turned into a nightmare. The attack killed 145 people and injured over 500 of them. But how did something so horrible happen in the heart of Moscow? And most importantly, who was responsible for it? Prepare yourself to dive into the dark side of dollars, because this is the reality of the Crocus City Hall attack. To understand how Crocus City Hall ended up being the site of Russia's deadliest terrorist attack in decades, let's rewind about 2 weeks before the attack. The story kicks off in the United States. On March 7th, 2024, the US Embassy in Moscow dropped a chilling warning. US intel had uncovered that extremists had imminent plans to hit Russia's capital within the next 48 hours. And what's more is that the warning specifically called out large gatherings and concerts as possible targets and advised American citizens in Moscow to steer clear of crowded areas. But guess what? Nothing really happened during those 48 hours. Vladimir Putin ultimately said that the warning resembled blackmail, but as it turned out in the end, it was anything but a mistake. When the attack finally did hit 2 weeks later, it was as if the warning played out word for word. It happened on the outskirts of Moscow, just 12 miles from the Kremlin, in a large gathering during a concert. And just hours later, ISIS stepped up and claimed responsibility for the attack. They even released a video showing one of the 4 terrorists opening fire on the crowd. But here's the weird part. Russia didn't pay much attention to the ISIS claim, and we'll tell you why in just a bit. But one thing was quite obvious. The US was 100% right in its warning, even down to the small details. Or worse, maybe they knew a lot more than what they let out, and this raised a lot of pressing questions for Russian intelligence. Why would a terrorist group target Russia? How did the US know before anyone else? And why now? The answers go far deeper than what you might see on the surface. Putin insists on believing that Russia can't be the target of attacks by extremist groups. However, there are multiple reasons why ISIS would have chosen Moscow. First off, Russia has been a key player in the Syrian civil war since 2015. They've been providing airstrikes, funding, and military muscle to Bashar al-Assad's regime, the same regime that ran a brutal campaign against opposition forces, including ISIS itself. Putin wanted to flex Russian military power in the Middle East, and Syria gave him a perfect chance to project Russian military power to do it. And much of it happened at the cost of ISIS's influence in Syria. So you see, Russia's involvement wasn't just a threat to ISIS's operations in Syria, it was personal. On top of that, Russia is also a major ally of one of ISIS's biggest enemies, Iran. It has backed Iran in many of its anti-terror campaigns. And if that's not enough, remember that the Soviet Union's role in Afghanistan in the 1980s has made Russia an enemy of Afghan Mujahideen. When you stack all that up, it's not hard to understand why Moscow would have been a target for ISIS. Sounds quite convincing so far, right? But hold on. There might be much more to this story. What if this wasn't just a terror attack? What if we're looking at a dirty game of geopolitics instead? What if ISIS was just acting as a proxy? And what if the true mastermind behind this stunt was none other than Russia's greatest rival? Let's go back to the warning issued by the US Embassy on March 7th. The warning straight up mentioned the chance of an imminent extremist attack in Moscow, calling out large gatherings and concerts. Fast forward 2 weeks, and the warning came true. An attack on the outskirts of Moscow, a large gathering, a concert, and ISIS taking responsibility. If US intelligence knew this much, is it possible that they knew even more than that? Or worse, did they have something to do with the attack? Let's look at some facts first. Remember the Syrian civil war? The truth is that the US and other Western countries backed many of the rebel groups fighting Bashar al-Assad, and Russia's military support delivered some serious blows to these groups. So it's obvious that the US was not happy with Russia's actions in Syria. And if you look around a little, something similar is playing out in Ukraine. The US and its European allies are fighting a proxy war against Russia by providing financial and military aid to Ukraine. What if this attack is just another part of a larger proxy war? Only this time the target was Russian civilians. That's not such a crazy thought. Besides, there's also the unusual way that the US reacted to the attack. As soon as ISIS came up with its claim, the American media was lightning quick to weave a narrative around it. They were all over it. Every major media outlet started pushing the narrative that Russia had fallen victim to a massive terrorist attack. In fact, Bloomberg even reported that the attack shattered the illusion of security Putin had cultivated. Narratives like this hurt Putin's image geopolitically, pushing Russian citizens to question their president and the government. And on top of that, they also justify the US support for Ukraine in its fight against Russia. Of course, there's no evidence to back these claims, but then you can't expect a nation like the US to leave behind trails. That's why many conspiracy theorists are confident that the US not only had some vague intel, but planned the entire thing. However, when it comes to what Russia thinks of the attack, the story is entirely different. Russia is pointing its fingers at its immediate enemy. Just hours after the attack at Crocus City Hall, the Russian police managed to get hold of two of the attackers in the Bryansk region, about 210 miles from Moscow. Within 14 hours, Russia's Federal Police Service, the FSB, announced the arrest of 11 people, including the 4 terrorists allegedly behind the attack. As it turned out, all 4 of them were originally from Tajikistan, a country that's become a recruiting ground for ISIS operations in recent years. But here comes a twist. Instead of pointing at ISIS, Russia has been quick to put all the blame on its neighbor at war, Ukraine. According to Putin, the attack's sole purpose was to mess with Russia's unity before Putin won the election. Reserve FSB Colonel Andrew Popev also claimed that the terrorists were planning to flee the country by entering into Ukraine. Russian state officials have doubled down on these claims, even saying that it was Ukraine and not ISIS that ordered the attack. There's no valid evidence to back all of these allegations, but honestly, Russia's claims make a lot of sense in many ways. After all, Ukraine is at war with a much stronger opponent. Even with all the support it's been getting from the US and its allies, it's still no match for Russia. So is it that hard to imagine Ukraine resorting to such indirect tactics to weaken its enemy from the inside? And let's not forget that in the bigger picture of Russia versus the US, Ukraine is just a US proxy. If the US asks Ukraine to join a secret plan to target Russia, could Ukraine really say no? I doubt it. Plus, the timing couldn't have been better. Russia was busy on the front lines in Kyiv and Donetsk. It was just the right set of conditions. An unstable region, porous borders, and a distracted Russian military, all of it ripe for exploitation. But hold on, what about the ISIS claim? Was it really involved in the attack? As it turns out, the answer isn't so straightforward. As I mentioned earlier, ISIS has its possible reasons to attack Russia. However, if you dig a little deeper, these terrorists don't really need a specific reason to go after anyone. ISIS has a history of hitting nations that may or may not have done it any harm, including Germany, which has played little role in any anti-ISIS operations. So if ISIS really was behind the attack, the real reason could be as simple as making itself relevant again. However, there's a big catch here. This attack didn't feel like a typical ISIS operation. Think about it. How many times have you seen ISIS carry out such major attacks in which the attackers planned to leave? Usually, such attacks involve people who are ready to die for their cause. But in this case, all of the perpetrators were planning to escape. This doesn't quite feel like the ISIS code of conduct, does it? What seems likely is that these attackers from Tajikistan did it for money. But then again, who gave them the orders? Was it the US, or was it the US-backed Ukraine, as Putin says? If either of this is true, it's possible ISIS stepped in just to cover up the real players. After all, it also had its benefits. Because, let's face it, ISIS has lost much of its momentum in the past decade. It's witnessed repeated failed terrorist campaigns, targeted airstrike on its leaders, and funding drying up. Countries such as Turkey are cracking down on them hard. ISIS needs something to stay relevant, in other words, big deadly attacks. Or maybe just the credits for such attacks. If you follow the conspiracy theories, this arrangement would benefit both sides. The US was successful in painting Russia as an inefficient and insecure nation, and ISIS was able to send a loud message that it can kill people anywhere, even in a powerful country such as Russia. In the end, let's be clear that all of these claims are just theories for now. All we have are questions. Did the US have a hand in this attack? Did Ukraine team up with ISIS? Or worst of all, was it a joint plan by these three parties? There's no evidence to back any of it up, but you tell us, do any of these theories seem believable to you? Or better yet, do you have a theory of your own? Whatever it is, tell us in the comments. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and remember, the truth lies in the details.